morning, everyone. This is Dr. Mary Manjikian from the Robertson School of Government at Regent University. And this morning I want to talk a little bit about exceptionality and states of emergency and states of exception and what that means for us as political scientists. As most of you are aware, over the weekend, a number of states of emergency were declared. The United States declared a state of emergency as they mobilized resources to combat the coronavirus. I know here in Virginia, our state enacted a state of emergency, and my city of Chesapeake actually has enacted a state of emergency. So what we're interested in as political scientists is the fact that when an emergency occurs, it's almost like it catapults us into like a different time zone. Normally, when we talk in international relations about politics, we tend to talk in these very long-term frameworks, right? We tend to talk about the Treaty of Westphalia. We tend to talk about sort of, constitutional conventions. And we tend to assume that politics runs in a pretty regularized way, kind of politics as usual, and that things that occur are not that they have precedents, things that occur. We kind of do things as we normally do them. But this week, if you've been paying any attention in the news, you probably heard this word unprecedented more than you've probably heard it in a very long time. Well, what is a state of emergency and what does that mean? And what does it mean in terms of governments acting in ways that are unprecedented? Well, when a state of emergency occurs, it means that a state now, by a state we mean a nation usually, has the ability to use kind of extraordinary power to mobilize resources. And some international relations folks are kind of worried about this. There's a man named Georgi Agamben who wrote a book several years ago where he talked about what he called states of exception. And he harked back to a kind of political theorist named Schmidt who famously said this line. He said, "Sovereign is he who decides the exception." And what Schmidt was worried about was he said if somebody had kind of an authoritarian side to begin with, then they might look for reasons to declare a state of emergency or a space of exception in order to engage in ways that otherwise they wouldn't be permitted to do. And Agamben and some other folks who talk about this, they talk about places, even in America, which aren't exactly democracies. They say, for example, if you're going through TSA at the airport, you have fewer rights than you normally do, right? Somebody can order you to take your clothes off and they can make sure you're not carrying a bomb or something like that. Things that if they were normally done to you, you could probably sue and you could object, but you cannot object when you're in a space of exception or when you are in kind of a time of exception. So as we've seen throughout the world in the last couple of weeks, states have declared states of emergency and they have implemented orders from closing borders. We just closed the border between the United States and Canada to not allowing people into their countries. A lot of countries have said you can't come into my country if we think you might be carrying the virus, to order airlines not to fly to certain places, to kind of at some point we might start kind of mandating that people work, things like calling back retired nurses, asking them to come back into work again. Rationing is something that's an exceptional practice, doesn't normally happen in a democracy. Normally you can buy whatever you want. And things like quarantines and lockdowns, right? In even a democracy like Italy, requiring that people have a piece of paper showing that they have the right to be where they are if they have left their homes. The idea that a policeman can stop you and demand to know where you're going, demand to see your papers. And so Georgi Agamben, the man who first started talking about states of exception, he wrote a rather controversial article last week where he said, "I'm not convinced that the coronavirus emergency is actually necessary." He said, "I am worried that states, including the state of Italy, are using this virus as a way to increase their overall reach in order to make the state more powerful and to make individual rights and group rights less powerful." And I found myself thinking about this when President Trump declared that state of emergency, because what's interesting is in the states of emergency that have been declared in something like 37 out of 50 states right now, a lot of cities, there is no actual end date on the legislation. We don't really know when the state of emergency is going to end. And so that's a little scary. I mean, what if it continued forever, right? And the term that political scientists use is they say an issue becomes securitized, and that's what moves it into this state of exception. And they say if you go back, one thing that you'll see, really beginning with kind of President Bush and the war on AIDS, uh, President Reagan and the war on drugs, is whenever people use that word and they say we're declaring war on something, war on illegal immigration, often that's a way of kind of extending the state's reach into society by giving it new powers, unprecedented powers that it might not have had before. So, hi, that's my husband. Come and say hello. And so when we begin to talk about the coronavirus, we can notice the use of this term war, right? This week, President Trump has talked about perhaps invoking something called the War Powers Act, which would allow him to mandate that businesses switch over. For example, they're talking about having GM switch from making cars to making ventilators. So in all those instances, what we see is the state acting very forcefully in unprecedented ways. People like Agamben, they're very worried. They say that what's happening is there's a lack of accountability, right? We may have voted for our president, but we did not vote to give him all of these additional powers. Rather, he just kind of took them because of the seriousness of the situation. And as we noted, we're not really sure when he's going to give them back. So normally, if a leader does something that you see is violating your rights, you can do something like, vote them out of office. And what's particularly interesting in states of emergency is often the people who are given these powers are not people that we actually voted for at all. We actually never vote for the head of the CDC. That's someone who's merely appointed. And during states of exception, often the people who are making these decisions that are going to affect your lives, you might not even know their name. I don't think any of us knew who Fauci was until last week, even though he's really having an impact on most of our lives right now. That's why I'm working from home. That's why my husband's working from home. So all of these decisions do have an impact on us. Wars on things are really good. If you can marshal resources and get them in place real quickly, you can defeat an enemy, if you will. When we decided we were going to, under President Bush, kind of have a fight against AIDS in Africa, we were very quickly, without a lot of public discussion, able to put a lot of resources towards that goal. So states of exception can be very efficient. In the long run, we can definitely see why we use them, but we want to think about these in the short run, but we want to think about the long-term implications. We want to think about what does it mean when someone we don't really know and didn't vote for is making decisions about us, and when something like a state of emergency doesn't have an end date. So lots of things to think about in this debate, and we'll look at some more issues next time when I see you.